What I'm going to do in the next 20, 25 minutes is run quickly through the cyber threat landscape and what it means to you as our clients, and what we see happening in the industry, trends that are happening, and what we've seen from actually dealing with incidents with our own customers, and sharing that with you, so you can maybe focus your own uh, threat program and security management program to keep it secure. So let me just make sure I'm walking through here. So I think I'm a firm believer that we don't need to worry overly about super duper ninja hackers or advanced persistent threats or anything. The majority of threats, the majority of issues that we've seen ourselves, and I've got some other industry data to back that assertion up, but the majority of issues that we see are actually down to the same old issues coming over and over again. And I'll discuss those in the next few minutes. There won't be any major prizes for people to guess what those are, but it is reminiscent of the famous phrase, those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And if we stop learning from what's happened in the past, well, then we're not going we're going to have the same issues over and over again. And this is what I'm seeing consistently happening with regards to cybersecurity. And this can be backed up as well from the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. This is a publication that comes out every year by Verizon, who are a US-based telecommunications and consulting firm. And Verizon have partnered with many organizations around the world, such as Europol, Interpol, the US Secret Service, FBI, Australian Federal Police, police forces throughout Europe and Asia, computer emergency response teams around the world. Irish Cert being one of them is from Irish point of view, contributes our data into Verizon as well. And Verizon takes this information, which of course has been anonymized beforehand, but they take that data and they analyze it to look at trends and to show us what's really happening in the industry. And what I like about the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report is that it's vendor neutral. So it's not a report from an antivirus software vendor, or it's not a report from any type of vendor that is biased towards their client base, or probably more likely more biased towards their product. Verizon's uh, data is unbiased, and therefore, to me, gives us one of the truer pictures we have out there as to what's happening from a cyber threat viewpoint. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but you can see there's some very interesting information from the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, and I would recommend you do download it. You don't even have to give them your email address you can download it quite easily. But you can see up there, 45% of breaches featured hacking. Now, hacking is a very broad term in it, because if you look up to the right-hand table, there, figure, the majority of breaches happen through brute force of or use of stolen credentials. So that's people's uh, passwords being phished by emails. It's people reusing the same passwords across different systems. So as a member of your staff who has signed up to a newsletter, their sports club newsletter, and uh, has used the password for that, they've also used that password to access your cloud environment. And if that password gets compromised, the criminals are reusing them and stuffing them across the way. So this is where we're seeing a lot of attacks happening. And in particular with the pandemic, this is having an impact. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. More close to home, this is from the Central Statistics Office. And you can see it's saying here that in 2018, which is the latest update to their data, this is hot up their website as of 2-3 days ago, 17.9% of Irish companies had some sort of ICT related security incident. So if we translate that into other terms, that means 1 in 5, nearly 1 in 5, nearly 20% of every business in Ireland has had some sort of ICT security related event, which is quite significant when you think about it. So think about all of the vendor and partner companies you use, nearly 20% of them potentially could have had a security breach. And what impact would that have on your environment? IRISCERT, as I said, it's a not-for-profit organization. We provide computer emergency response team services to the Irish internet community free of charge. Uh, we last year in 2019 were notified of over 50,000 incidents affecting Irish IP addresses. So that was websites or companies, etc., in Ireland who had a cybersecurity incident. Majority of those incidents were actually company websites being hacked by criminals to host malicious software or to host phishing pages or to launch attacks against other businesses. So it's vitally important that businesses look after their online presence to make sure they're not being abused or misused by criminals. But if you take the Verizon Data Breach Report, we look into all the data we have from BH Consulting, from the breaches we've been involved in, and indeed from the IRISCERT. These are the top issues we see happening over and over again. This is where we see incidents happening. Poor passwords, or more important, more significant nowadays, lack of strong authentication into systems. So a lack of multi-factor authentication, lack of strong passphrases, etc. Missing patches, systems not being updated, vulnerable platforms. So companies setting up a website using WordPress and that website has not been updated in months or years, or other website platforms not being updated. Out-of-date software. We do still see issues with Windows XP. I was actually on a call earlier on this morning, and one of the client I'm dealing with, they have a critical system that is still running Solaris, which is out of support since 2014. So there are significant vulnerabilities out there, and there are understandable business reasons why companies can't migrate off certain platforms, but it is becoming a bigger and bigger risk over and over again. Out-of-date antivirus software. We dealt with a ransomware attack a few months ago, where core of the problem was that the antivirus software hadn't been updated properly. If it had been, the ransomware would have been blocked. And then, to me, another big issue that is the lack of monitoring. People not monitoring their environment, not being alerted to potential breaches, and therefore not knowing that they're being attacked. That's like having a burglar alarm on your house and not responding to it, or not listening. So I would strongly recommend, if looking at these 5 topics here could significantly improve your security posture. What do we see happening in the future? And this is, it's probably apt time of year to be having this conversation, because we're going to be inundated with predictions from various vendors for 2021 of what they see from cybersecurity and data protection. To be quite frank, I'm not expecting anything new or exciting to come along. It's going to be pretty much the same stuff over and over again. And with Europol, their Internet Organized Crime Threat Assessment Report similarly backs up that assertion. Here's a quote from it. 2 big attacks, and again, these are 2 areas that we see a lot of activity happening, is ransomware and business email compromise. So they've been around for years. Ransomware has been around since the 1990s. Business email compromise has been around for decades too. I remember my father asking me a few months ago, what is it you actually do, Brian? I still don't understand what you do for a living. And I tried to explain to him. I started talking about business email compromise, where a company gets an email pretending to be from a vendor or from the CEO, demanding the accounts person sends payment urgently to a new bank account. And my father used to work for Roadstone in Castlebar, and he says, "You mean they're still using that attack? We used to get those letters in by fax back in the 1970s." It's going, well, there you go. Criminals will still use to. The second part of the quotation there, will continue to refine their attacks that have been shown to work. So these attacks work. Ransomware works because people want their information back. They will happily pay it to get the information back. And that's why criminals keep using these. It works. The World Economics Forum Global Risk Report identified Data fraud and cyber attacks is the top 10 risks for 2020, and impact being information infrastructure and cyber attacks. I think interesting to see that they also had infectious diseases down at a mere number 10. They won't put any money on where they might see the impact of infectious diseases for 2021 on their risk profile as well. And obviously, COVID-19 has had a major impact on our environments because it's forced many of us with lockdowns, and we're in our second lockdown now, to move to remote working. Many companies may not have been prepared for moving people to remote working. So we now have people and staff using their own personal devices. They're operating maybe from their own Wi-Fi, which the routers and firewalls they may have may not be as well protected as uh, what's in your own companies. And with staff working remotely and worried about the pandemic, this is an opportunity for criminals to target people with more phishing attacks based with COVID-19 teams. So we've seen attacks where emails have gone to staff pretending to be from revenue for the wage subsidy scheme, or from HR talking about benefits or updates regarding COVID-19, or using airline refunds or holiday tickets or delivery notes, which people are getting more and more now, to try and get people to click on a link or to click on an attachment to infect their computer or to phish their credentials. So basically, when it comes down to predicting the future, my mantra is always follow the money. And the same things are going to happen. So CEO fraud is going to continue. So I would recommend strongly that you have good processes in place in your accounts payable, that if an email comes in from a vendor saying they've changed their banking details, or an email comes in from the CEO or a senior member of staff, there are checks and balances in place to verify and make sure that those are genuine. Ransomware continues to be one of the biggest threats out there. And it's becoming more, the criminals are becoming more adept at it. There's a recent attack in Finland where a psychotherapy organization got hit by ransomware. But instead of demanding ransom from the organization, the criminals are now targeting the individual patients and looking for ransom from the individual patients for their records not to be released onto the internet. So the criminals are going to attack, and at the moment there are hospitals in the US treating COVID-19 patients that are under attack right now by ransomware gangs, and they're looking for money to get their systems back up and running. So criminals are using ransomware and continue to use ransomware because people will pay money. I'll talk about how we can protect against that in a few minutes as well. Supply chain attacks. Again, this is where criminals are going to go. If they're going to attack you, they may not attack you directly. They may attack your supply chain. Some of your vendors may be smaller businesses, may not have as robust security as you. This is a way for them, the criminals, to get into your environments. It's a great way for them to do invoice redirection fraud. They compromise one of your suppliers, then send you an email pretending to be from the supplier saying they've changed the banking details. Please pay your money from there on in. Cloud attacks. This is where we're going to see a lot more attacks. This is predominantly because of COVID-19 and many people moving online. So many of you may have had to move to online services, maybe something like Office 365 or Google Mail or Salesforce or Amazon or whatever other cloud services are out there in order to keep your business surviving, migrate users over, and are now working okay. But very often the only authentication we have on these is passwords. And again, coming to the point we made earlier on, repeatedly we're seeing people's passwords being phished, emails pretending to be from Microsoft, etc., getting their passwords phished. We're also seeing attacks now against cloud servers themselves. Nitro PDF, which is a cloud-based Adobe PDF reader, have been breached and data stolen from them as well. So we're going to see more of those attacks happening. Humans are going to continue to be targeted, so we're going to have phishing emails, social engineering aimed at at staff. So effective training, multi-factor authentication are the two key areas I would recommend we focus on over the next months. So how to defend? Well, first things first, identify what it is you're trying to protect. So identify your key assets. What data is important to you? Where is it? Where is it stored? Do a good risk assessment against them. Figure out, now we've moved this information into the cloud. What are the risks? What new risks have happened? Now we have staff working remotely. What are new risks that are happening there? So figure out, what do we need to do? Do we avoid that risk? Do we stop that happening? Do we reduce it? Do we put in additional controls? Or do we transfer it to somebody else? And that could be using a cloud provider, but providing we've got the right mitigations in place. So an effective risk management is key there as well. If you haven't done it, do have policies in place, particularly for bring your own device and remote working now. Make sure staff are aware of what their responsibilities are, and publish them. Security awareness training. If any of you were to ask me a question, Brian, if I have €10,000 to spend on one thing in the next 6 months to improve cybersecurity in my organization, what is it? I would say security awareness training. Particularly given remote working and everything else, this is the biggest bang for buck I think we can get. And this should not be a PowerPoint presentation that is sent around, or a few movie clips. A good security awareness, comprehensive training program to reinforce messaging and make a culture of security is key. Monitor and respond. Make sure you monitor your systems, your cloud systems, your on-prem, and that you have the ability to respond. And also, no doubt, not just are your staff working remotely, but your IT team and your security teams may be working remotely. So it's important to review your process and procedures, see how can you manage and support the end devices and respond to a security breach remotely. Your process and procedures may be robust and sturdy given the old ways of working that you're in the office, but now with staff working remotely, can you still do what you need to do? Information sharing. If you're in any user groups, business communities, please, I would recommend share information amongst yourselves so that we can better protect ourselves as well. If you do become a victim of a security breach, I would strongly recommend contacting An Garda Síochána and giving them more details and information, because if they don't know subprime is happening, they can't get the resources to deal with it. Do regular assessments, review your environment. Things change, business environment change, the technology changes, the threat actors change. It's important to do regular assessments to ensure that you're ahead of the curve and that you have the right controls in place. There are some good frameworks in place. So you can always contact us, of course, and we gladly help you, but you also can look at these other frameworks which are available and vendor neutral. The Cyber Essentials from the UK, ISO 27001. And NISA has a very good top 10 cyber hygiene tips for SMEs during the COVID-19 pandemic. And indeed, the Data Protection Commissioner has also put in a good report on how to protect personal data from working remotely as well. And then finally, there is a very good report from the National Cybersecurity Centre in the Department of Communications, and they have a guide of 12 steps to cybersecurity, guidance for Irish businesses and how to keep themselves secure. So with that, this is Stop Tour. I'd like to say thanks for listening to me, and I'll hand you over to Valerie.
Thank you. I just need to, can you stop sharing your screen, Brian?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Go.
Sorry. Are we sharing?
Yeah, we can see your slide deck file, not the presentation screen. So there you go. I was going to say we can cheat and read ahead.
So you're all very welcome, guys. Thank you so much for attending this meeting. I suppose one of the things before I thought it was really interesting, Brian, some of the items that you were talking about there. And for me, instead of my father having that conversation with me about what I did, my 5-year-old son, my then 5-year-old son, asked me what did I do for a living, and I couldn't explain it to him, to a 5-year-old. So I said that, you know, the internet and this big thing out there called the internet, well, I was like a security guard for that. And that was the best way that I could explain it to him. And he went, So he understood, I thought. And the following day I went to pick him up from school, and he came running out with a group of other 5-year-old boys, all of them running up to me like I had sweets or something. I didn't know what, but they all wanted to know what was my uniform like. So.
Well, we're all working from home, so it's pajamas.
So anyway, before I begin, I suppose as part of the BH Academy, which I'm proud to be a part of, my PhD has taken me down a number of different tracks, and one of those tracks related to privacy is digital ethics. And there are no answers in digital ethics. I think that's really important to understand. So I'm not going to be saying to you, this is the solution. You know, this is the 12 steps. I'm not able to say that, because digital ethics is very gray. What's ethical to one person may not be ethical to another. So it's quite subjective. So I'm not giving you any answers. What I am trying to do is maybe just get your thoughts flowing on what might be right and what might be not so right. So I call it in my PhD doing privacy right, not doing privacy rights. And that's essentially where the interest in digital ethics has come from. So let's get cracking. The problem that we have at the moment is that we respond to privacy through legislation. However, legislation is not able to deal with much of what privacy is presenting it with. For instance, we have a situation which is the question of, is code? Is it free speech? Now, the Supreme Court has said that it is free speech, but if we think about the complications of code being free speech, now why is code free speech? Well, encryption, algorithms, these are the problems that we are facing at the moment. And so we're saying that it's free speech. That means it has to be protected in the Constitution in the US. But really, is code free speech? So that's something that legislation is trying to deal with at the moment, but it's wholly inadequate to deal with that question. We see that Gartner last year said that privacy and digital ethics were strategic technology trends, but they're not technology. Neither of them are technology. They were the only item in 2019 in their strategic trends that weren't actually technology. They're concepts. And so these concepts have come about because of the problem of dealing with privacy as a regulatory requirement rather than dealing with it beyond regulation. We see this really evident with people like Edward Snowden. So we all know who Edward Snowden is. He's the guy who told us, he was the whistleblower who told us that the security agencies in the US were up to no good and were actually sucking out loads of data from all the big five, and were using that data for national surveillance. And particularly with non-US citizens. So we knew, you know, when Edward Snowden told us this, but the most interesting thing about the Edward Snowden revelations, and where you see ethics at play, is not everybody agrees. I went to a talk, so, you know, is he a hero or is he a traitor? This is the question we have to ask. So let's play with that. We have our first poll, okay? So we're gonna have a poll. And what I'd like us to do is just to answer that poll, and then I'll tell you what Pew, the research center, said about their poll. So Amy's going to just launch that first poll.
Sorry, Brian, just you're the host, so you'll just need to do that.
Okay. There we go. Can everybody see that? Okay, we're nearly getting there.
Oh, we've a few radicals.
So the 6 people who haven't voted, I don't know if they want another minute, 10 seconds.
They don't have to. The answer is there. Okay, it's pretty typical that in Europe we have much more leading towards Edward Snowden. So we can end that. And here's what Pew said. So it's 50-50. It's split a nation 50-50 in the US. But here in Europe, it's never 50-50. We're always about 75, 80% on Edward Snowden's side. So I discovered this when I was at a talk. And I met a US person who was also at the talk, and they were doing a presentation. And I said, you know, it's really interesting what you were talking about. And he said, I don't want to share the stage with that traitor. And it was a very peculiar thing, because I kind of thought, he's a cool guy, he's great. Did you see what he did? We came at it from two polar opposite perspectives. And there's lots of reasons behind that, but an awful lot has to do about our emotional attachment to national surveillance. If you think about the US has had security incidents where invasion of privacy is necessary to protect society. And in Europe, we've had holocausts and we've had dictatorships where invasion of privacy has to be protected against because it's resulted in genocide in the past. So we have these two polar positions resulting from our historical backgrounds. So that aside, you can see why ethics is such a complex area to regulate, because there is no right and wrong. So if we go into digital ethics and exactly what it is, we'll talk about, you know, it's not about creating something called ethics. Technology has no ethics, its people have ethics. And technology inherits the bias of those people. So we have to consider that our technology is adopting our own ethical biases. If we look at Tay, for instance, Tay was, and this is only a couple of years ago, Tay was Microsoft's AI chatbot, and there was great investment into Tay. Tay was launched, and within 24 hours on Twitter, Tay had to be pulled off because Tay turned into a pure Nazi after being in the US Twitter. But in China, Tay was soft and gentle and sweet and loving. And before anybody thinks, well, maybe the Chinese are nicer on Twitter than in the US, there's also things like the Chinese are quite afraid to say things on Twitter because Big Brother's watching those tweets. So, you know, you have to bear in mind that there's cultural differences. But in the US, it was pulled in 24 hours because it became a full Nazi was the quote. So we can see inheriting biases through things, incidents like this. So let's talk about what digital ethics is. It's a field, it's concerned with the way technology is shaping and will shape, bear that in mind, in the future, our political, social, environmental, and moral existence. So it's not just about the now, it's about the future. And that's what makes it really, really complex. So for instance, if we look to the past, Instagram, did Instagram know when they created their product that those likes that they created were going to be used to abuse people? You know, did the big, large technology organizations, did they know that they were going to become digital monopolies and all the issues that were going to arise from that? Organizations don't necessarily know when they're born what the issues are going to be in their future. And this is digital ethics is really important, is trying to figure out what might those issues be. And it's impossible to regulate and use regulation to protect against risks you cannot yet conceive. So it is in this sort of domain that digital ethics is born, which tries to consider things beyond what we're aware of now. So let's take a whistle-stop tour across the world and take a look at what exists now and think then about what issues that might represent in the future. We have KFC and Baidu. Baidu is the Google of China. Baidu has partnered with KFC to open this smart restaurant, okay, which basically employs facial recognition to make recommendations about what customers might order based on factors like their age, their gender, their facial expressions, and their previous order inferences. So we could say, well, you know, there's health data in there. That's us thinking privacy regulation. But we might also think, what about the autonomy to make your own decisions? In 10 years' time, if this technology takes off, might we be taking away human beings' autonomy to make their own decisions? So this is what digital ethics tries to explore. We have an incredibly interesting game called Nevermind. So again, never mind, uses emotion detecting artificial intelligence based on biofeedback technology. So it's using eyes, facial expressions, mouth, it's using lots of different things, but it's biofeedback. But particularly the iris to detect a player's mood and the dopamine levels. And it readjusts the game's levels and the difficulties according to those responses. So if you're finding it too easy, it ups the game. Now that sounds fantastic, like it's going to be a really interesting ride for the player, but unfortunately, it's also going to be hugely addictive because it's tapping into dopamine. So we know that in the future, this technology could change addiction and levels of addiction, which we already know exists. This is a wonderful one. I think it's amazing. And it's a company called Real Eyes. Great name, but it's Real Eyes. And Real Eyes is eye tracking and facial expression, facial coding is what it's called, to analyze mood, the negative gray reactions that it records and positive red reactions. So it follows using, it's a mobile phone technology. So somebody looks at something on a mobile phone, it's able to follow their reactions on the mobile phone. And it used a sample audience. I think it used about 20,000 people in its sample audience, and it showed them the John Lewis ad, last year's John Lewis ad. I don't know if anyone else is a John Lewis Christmas ad fan out there, but I am absolutely, it starts my Christmas every year. But it used that to track people's responses to this ad. So think about this as a powerful marketing tool. But it knew that people weren't that impressed by Elton John. That it was grey on Elton John, but when they saw the little boy, it went red. So they know that that's what they need to tap into, is the little boy. And it's, you know, if I know that when you watch it, when you see the little boy, you go, ah, but they're able to detect that from my mobile phone. How powerful is that? But how abusive could that be in the future? So to address this, we have what's called the Ethical OS. It comes from a foundation called the Omidyar Foundation. And what they're aiming to do is to present the public with tools that will enable them to do privacy better. Not necessarily privacy right, but privacy better than they're currently doing it, and to identify digital ethics across a wide frame. And it gives, essentially, it's intended to provide you with a tool, and it's publicly available for everybody, so that their teams can explore potentials, and it's just potentials. And really, it's more interesting than it is applicable right now to everybody, but everybody can think about it if they're developing any software or services that maybe in the future, you might think about these key areas. So it presents us with 8 areas that we need to think about. And each area, if you can discuss it with your team, and they give you the key points that you need to discuss with your team. So that's what I'm going to do, is I'm just going to present. But it is a whistle-stop tour. It's 8 areas. It's a huge framework. And so I'm just giving you the snippets as quickly as I possibly can, because of obviously the time limitation that we have. So it's called the Ethical OS, obviously for operating system. And basically it's how not to regret the things you build. And that's essentially what it's called. So when you're setting up with your team, you can ask yourself, if the technology you're building right now could someday be used in unexpected ways, how can you hope to be prepared? And what categories of risk should you pay special attention to right now, or to consider those? And what design, team, or business model choices can actively safeguard society from future risks? So this is the Ethical OS. This is the framework. There's 8 zones. And we're just going to go through and explore each zone. And as I say, there's no answers in this. It's about a tool to help explore. So the first one, is truth, disinformation, and propaganda. Okay, so this has existed for many years. We have Freddie Star Ate My Hamster. Those of us who are of a particular vintage will remember Freddie Star Ate My Hamster. But this disinformation, the Sun newspaper, this has existed for many, many years. Freddie Star never ate anybody's hamster, but he wasn't getting enough money. And Max Clifford at the time was his agent. And we all remember Max Clifford. not for good reasons, but he created the story and turned Freddie Starr overnight into a sensation, because Freddie Starr turned from earning 100,000 into $1 million per appearance. So it was a huge change for him, and that's what this was aimed at. It was aimed at publicity. So, you know, truth and disinformation has always existed, but now it's at a much wider scale. And we're, you know, anyone with any level of intelligence pretty much knew that Freddie Starr didn't eat anybody's hamster. But now we cannot tell truth from distruth on the internet. It's very, very difficult. And why is that difficult? Well, it's because of some technologies. So let's talk about those in a second, but we need to ask questions. And this is what the tool tells us to do with our team. Ask, could bad actors use this tech to subvert truth, to create political distrust, or to destabilize governments? And, you know, we're all thinking if Facebook had asked this question 10 years ago, we might be in a different place today. Could it be used to undermine trust in social institutions, such as in our TV, in our news, in our media, medicine, democracy, science, so many areas? And what's the potential for fake news or deepfake videos? And this is the area that we've seen disinformation in, is in deepfake videos and fake news. And the biggest perpetrator of this is obviously being Facebook. And we know Cambridge Analytica really showed us how they were affecting the democratic processes. So that was because of the manipulation that they were doing. That was fake. That was essentially presenting fake news to us in a way that they knew would be beneficial to their requirements for Cambridge. We also have what are called deepfake videos, and they can be made from stills. So here we have a famous still, and this is what we can turn that still into with that technology. Now that is incredible, isn't it amazing? But it's also incredibly dangerous. And I don't have time to show you this video. It's a TED Talk. It's like everybody has one of their favorite TED Talks, and this would be one of mine. His name is Supersorn, and I'm not going to say his other name because it's Japanese. I can't pronounce it, but take a look at it. It's amazing. It's he is the creator. Look at the age of him. He is the creator of a technology that is the deepfake video technology, and he created for a project called Living Histories, where he takes the survivors of the Holocaust and he makes them alive by taking their picture and then imposing their voice onto the picture. And this was the intention, was to bring those people back to life so that their stories would seem more meaningful, because all we have are books. We don't have them. But he brings them back to life through these videos. And so he shows the videos and we think, oh my God, that's amazing. But what's awful is how that technology can be misused. Had they undertaken the ethical OS before they embarked on this, they would have identified that and put things in place, perhaps, that might have enabled us to manage that more effectively. But it's worth the watch. Whoops. So next one is addiction and dopamine economy. So we all know what the dopamine economy is, but does your business model benefit from maximizing user engagement? Let's go back to the effective game that I talked about. Does that business model benefit from maximizing user engagement? Is that good for the mental, physical, and social health of your users? And what does extreme addiction look like? Have you thought about these things? Have you thought about what unhealthy use looks like? So there's sneaky ways that Instagram and Facebook and Tinder lure you in and get you addicted. And one of the interesting things was what they've done is they've taken gaming theory, which is applied to casinos in Las Vegas, etc., remove the windows, take out the clocks, do all those things to keep you there. Well, they do exactly the same thing. It's called gaming theory. They do it with Instagram, with Facebook. For instance, the scroll down to update Facebook. Why don't they give you just a push a button? Because the scroll down under gaming theory is the equivalent of the pulling the hand in the machine. That does something in our brains. It creates something in our brains. So that's why that exists. The fact that there is no end to the page, that is the removal of the clocks. It is, you don't know where the page ends, so you just keep on scrolling. So there's lots of sneaky ways that they get you addicted. We saw in China, Tencent, which is the largest game in China, they had to limit playtime of their top grossing game for children because 2 children committed suicide and 1 child died of neglect, that they just basically wouldn't leave the machine. So they had to put in restrictions because they didn't anticipate the level of addiction that the game would create. Next zone, economic and asset inequality. So I am doing whistle stop on this. There's much more detail in the actual tool itself. So economic and asset inequalities, will everybody have access to this tech? And those who don't, will they suffer as a result of not having access to it? A very good example of this is privacy. We know that we can buy an apple and get privacy when we buy an apple, but most African countries can't afford those Apple phones. They buy the cheaper Android phones, so they're actually not able to buy privacy. So, you know, there's asset inequality. What does your tech create, collect, or disseminate, and who can monetize or get recompensed by that? So for instance, if it's a Fitbit, a type of Fitbit, the health data, who's going to benefit from that? Are you going to benefit more from those who've got diabetes because you're going to sell that to a diabetic company who's making a drug? Are you going to sell those patients' data, but are you going to gain more money for them and they're not going to gain any more benefit? Are you going to replace labor, which is a really important one? We've seen that with AI. A lot of labor is being replaced with AI. And are you going to do something with the replacement of that? In other words, are you going to say, for instance, invest money in setting up academies to retrain people who were in those jobs that you're now going to replace? And is there other ways that the technology or your organization can contribute to economic security, if not through employment? In other words, can you do something in the community that can help people who've lost their jobs? And we see this in many, many different places, but you know that economic disequality, and we know that, for instance, Black people get more expensive car insurance in the US than white people, and that's because of algorithms that are built into the technology being biased. So, you know, if they had done the ethical OS on their development, these things wouldn't arise. Okay, machine ethics and then algorithmic biases. This is a really big area at the moment, and it's an area we see a huge amount of issue in. If you're using machine learning, AI data sets, are there historical biases in the data? It's actually a bit of a dumb question because the answer is yes, there are. The question should in fact be, have you done anything to remove those implicit biases? Because there's APIs from, say, IBM that actually will trawl through your data sets and see if there is any biases in the algorithms or the data set. So they have, I think, 10 different APIs that will check 10 different biases. Is there a possibility of those biases or reinforcing bias in algorithms? There's examples, excuse me, of various different pieces of AI being used in the US by police enforcement. And they have border protection records. Idemia is one of those. Its algorithm doesn't see all faces equally. So it can recognize a white face 5 times more likely than it can a black face, as in it can recognize it as a male white. Whereas in the black face, it can often get confused. And so that's because it's been written predominantly by white people. So, you know, build diversity into your product development and you'll most likely remove a lot of bias. And there you go, diversity of those developing the algorithm. And then assumptions of AI being correct. There is an assumption that when you have AI in place, that the answer they come up with is correct. In fact, you have to run parallel tests to make sure that it is, in fact, going to say the same thing as the human being would say. And are algorithms transparent to those impacted? So the interesting piece here is that the ethical OS is written in the US by a US foundation, and they don't have the right to know about the algorithms that we have under GDPR. GDPR tells us I have the right to transparency. And so I have the right, we've seen this and we're going to see more of it with the way the calculations are being made for the results of the Leaving Cert, that there's an algorithm involved in that. And people have the right to say it's not fair. So we're seeing this happening at the moment in the UK, that people are because they have the right to say, I want to see how that algorithm works. But they don't have that right in the States. So we know that, for instance, algorithms struggle to recognize Black faces equally, which is what I previously mentioned. And particularly at places like border controls, this is a really dangerous space. We also know that there was a predpol is what it's called. It's a prediction tool for police, and it actually is also known to be racially biased. So we know that racial bias is built into these things. They need to look at ensuring that racial bias is removed by running these APIs first. Surveillance, I love this one. Again, we're going to have another poll on this one. Surveillance and national surveillance for the purpose of security, which is what we have in the US an awful lot at the moment, and most of the issue with Schrems. But do you believe, so is national security for the purpose of surveillance acceptable when it infringes the constitutional right to privacy, which everybody has? So what do we believe? Let's take a look at this. Interesting. Not the answer I wanted, I just want to say. So it's interesting, we're talking half and half. Yeah, close to 47, 53, 44, 56. It's close to half and half. Usually, it's
50.
In Europe, it's a lot higher for I don't agree. And in the US, it's a lot higher for I do agree. And it's just interesting to see that there are differences, but this audience is almost 50-50. So you've stolen my thunder and ruined my point. Yeah, we're there about 50-50. But anyway, does the tech create data that can follow users throughout a lifetime, affect their reputation and impact their future and freedoms? Again, GDPR related, we would have the right to delete. Okay, so they don't in the US, but we would have the right to delete where that exists. This is stuck working for some reason. Oh, we're back again. And who do you not want to use your data? As in bad actors. You know, you might say, well, the government is not a bad actor, but to some people, for instance, journalists, maybe the government might be. So who do you not want to use your data, and how can you prevent it? So again, no answers, but I'm just saying there are examples of surveillance across the world. We have it internally in Ireland, but this is obviously the largest one is from the US. We have the US Patriot Act. In Italy, everybody's transactions are monitored by the state in your Visa card. So any transaction that's done on your Visa card is monitored by the state so that they can correlate that your spend with your declarations at the end of the year for tax. And they make a correlation between the two to see it's about fraud. So I personally think that's hugely invasive, but they accept it in Italy. So moving on to the next one, data control and monetizations. Do your users have the right to access your data? And if you profit from it, do they share in that profit? Can they monetize their data independently using this tech? And what's the worst risk that can happen if it's stolen or leaked? And what plan or policy for customer data is in place during mergers and acquisitions? Again, GDPR addresses this, but in the US, it's not addressed. So it's through the ethical frameworks. So we see an example of this, which is a social network called Steam It. And so every time you do something on Steam It, so activity, likes and things like that, you get a Steam, sorry, a digital currency called Steam. So it's not real, it's a digital currency, it's not paper-based. And you can accumulate it and you can convert it to cash at a period, or else you can buy more Steam with that. So you can buy part of the company. And I don't know how successful Steam It is. This was last year it existed. So, you know, it didn't sound like a very sustainable business model, but maybe it is. But I haven't heard about Steam It since. So one never knows. Implicit trust and user understanding. Does the tech do anything that users would be surprised at? If users object to their data being monetized or sold, can they still use the tech? So that's consent in GDPR. Are all users equal? Can the tech address consumer demands or government requirements for all users to be treated equally? And we see this implicit trust when the CEO of Uber presented a journalist with their GodView tool and showed the journalist that they were able to tell the journalist exactly where they had been, on what days and when, and that this tech was available for the CEO to use and anybody else in the company at any point in time. So that was a massive breach of trust. And we see how trust impacts organizations. We know that trust is absolutely fundamental to doing business online. So when users lose that trust, they stop doing business with us. And so this is the last one, which is hateful and criminal actors. And it's one that we've seen very recently. But can somebody use your tech to bully, stalk, or harass? Had the social media companies asked this question, they might have built in mechanisms to stop that from happening. What kinds of ransomware? Brian was talking about ransomware, theft, financial crimes, fraud, or illegal acts could arise from your tech. So for instance, encryption, did anybody ask, could encryption be used for a bad reason? Yes, it can. Ransomware uses encryption. It encrypts everything and you have to get the key. So where encryption can be used for really good things, it can also be used for really bad things. Could organized groups use your tech to spread hate, recruit, or discriminate? And what does hate look like on your platform? So this is one thing that we're seeing frequently is the use of the tech, social media particularly, to recruit or discriminate. So we see cancelling accounts linked to white nationalist rallies in Charlottesville. So we have organizations realizing that their tech is being misused by hateful actors. But we also see the tech being used, the same tech, Twitter bots being used for good as well as bad, because we know that they can use Twitter bots to improve our health by sending good messages just as much as they can the bad stuff. And that essentially is the ethical OS. It's a framework and you can pick from it and choose from it, but it may also just give you food for thought for the rest of the week to think about how the world is working. That's pretty much it.
Okay, thank you very much, Valerie. And thanks also to Brian. Appreciate your talks. I'd also like to thank Amy for organizing the event, and without it, nothing would work. So, thank you to our customers. Thank you for your continued business. We hope that this will be a one-off and that we'll meet you in person next time. And that we can share the normal kind of event that we have with you. But thank you very much for attending. And
maybe, does anybody want to ask any questions?
Yeah, if people want to ask a question, they can put it in the chat window. But while we're waiting, I just want to echo John's thoughts there and thank you all as our clients. We actually don't see you really as clients, to be fair. We see you more as partners, and we build up our knowledge based on our experiences with you and all the help you give us in allowing us to help you. So it's very much a partnership relationship. We find out we get better as we work with you. So thanks for your business and thanks for your support, particularly during this year, and hopefully we'll continue over the next few years as well. I know we're probably, as a company, we're not very good at saying and pushing things out, because we do follow the digital OS, maybe not to the same level as what Valerie went through there, but we do have some very good white papers on our website about prevention of ransomware. So there's, I think Amy, the white paper on ransomware is about 30 pages long with step-by-step guide on what you can do to implement to protect your systems from ransomware. We've an instant response guide up there as well. There's a guide up there on how to protect email security, and there's 2 or 3 more white papers there, and we're trying to develop and put more information up there. So if you have any thoughts on what you'd like us to write about and put up there, we will, and we should maybe share this webinar and the slide deck with people as well as they go along. So I think we have one question. This one's for you, Valerie, and very apt. It's from an anonymous attendee. Where can we learn more about the ethical OS?
So there's only one place to learn about it because it's quite nascent. It is only developed in 2018, and it was developed by an organization called the OMIDYAR Network. So that's OMIDYAR, the OMIDYAR Network. And if you Google OMIDYAR Ethical OS tool, it will bring you into the website, which provides you with 2 aspects. It provides you with a downloadable tool, which is essentially a PDF, which goes through each of the different zones. It presents you with the questions that you have to ask the team within those zones. And it also says, are you ready for a world where? And it gives you a list of scenarios within each of those. Now, I didn't go through the scenarios that it provides. I just went through some examples of things I knew existed in the world. Some of their scenarios are fictitious. They create them themselves. But, you know, one of them is quite interesting, which is called the smart toilet. And they ask, are you ready for a world in which, you know, if you use this toilet, they will collect the information, smart information from analysis of the contents of your smart toilet, and they will sell that information on. So, you know, they can analyze, the smart toilet can analyze the contents and then say, you know, population has this amount of X, Y, and Z in it. You know, they're completely fictitious, but would you be willing to trade your privacy for the purpose of this smart toilet? Because you get the free toilet from the company, and then you have to trade your information. And so essentially they can find out things about you. And yeah, it's pretty invasive, isn't it? But so they give you all these different scenarios, and it has 2 parts. So one is the sort of read about digital ethics piece, and the other is the actual tool itself, which is a PDF, for want of a better word. It is a PDF of these different zones and the questions you need to ask. But it's freely available, and you don't have to use it all. You can use whatever piece you want. So because OMIDYAR is a philanthropic advocacy group, everything that they do is available publicly. So you can just download it. There's absolutely no copyright on it. What they want to know, and so what I always do is I let them know when I speak about it. So I let them know I've spoken about it, because they want to know, is it being disseminated? Is their work worthy? So that's all they ask you do, is to let them know you've spoken about it. So that's where you can get it. Google OMIDYAR Network Ethical OS.
Put a link to it, Valerie, in the chat window there. So anybody wants to click on the chat window, the link to it is there. And I think you've just been a fine example there of a consultant talking crap. So if ever there was, so a smart toilet, I don't think would be in my future plans. I can tell you that much. Okay, well, just to echo John's thoughts there again, thank you everybody. Thanks to Amy for putting this together. There's a lot of hard work went into it. Sometimes we think virtual conferences are easier to run and quicker to run than the real life thing, but absolutely not. It's getting used to the technology and stuff. So thanks, Amy, for that. And of course, thanks to Valerie for our insights. I always find out Valerie's talks very interesting and engaging. And I think it's a pity we only had 25-30 minutes for her to go through that topic. And it's a lot more meat there we could go through. But thanks, Val, and thanks, John, for hosting it, and thank you everybody for attending. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks, guys. See you then. Bye bye.